Good morning. This is February the 16th, 2024, Friday. And we are in BBIS first year compulsory English class, where we have a presentation by Luniva on the text 17 pandemic innovations that are here to stay. So, in the essay that we talked about yesterday, that essay says there are 4 things you should pay attention to if you want to grow a long-term business from the innovations that people made during the COVID-19 crisis. And this essay also is very similar in the sense that here there are 17 examples and the writers present the item, the innovation, and they argue why this innovation will continue. So, reading this essay, you can get better ideas about yesterday's essay, because yesterday's essay says how to develop business, and this essay shows how we can develop a business. So let's invite the presenter, Ms. Luniva, and let's listen to her. So put the clip. Yes, it works. It's like this. She was pressing on this side, yes. It's all right. We learn by doing. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so come this side of the camera. So Luniva, we both are being recorded, and as you know, I post this video on Facebook page as well. I upload on my YouTube channel as well. Is there any objection to this?
No, sir.
Okay, go on.
Okay.
So let's listen to her carefully.
So, good morning, everybody. I am Luniva Shakya, and I am here to do my presentation on 17 pandemic innovations that are here to stay. So, this essay is by Politico, which is originally known as The Politico, and it is a US...
Close that curtain. There is too much glaring of the screen. The screen is glaring. Yes, go on.
So, Politico is a US-based...
Listen, on the corner there, listen to us.
It is a US-based So it is a US-based, oh my God, digital newspaper.
Okay, that so this essay was published on this digital newspaper, yes.
So this essay is under the section Recovery Lab. So Recovery Lab is a series from Politico that deals with the best ideas
As she writes on the whiteboard, you also take notes.
So, Recovery Lab is a series by this newspaper in which they collect ideas from around the country, which will help in the speedy recovery of the COVID-19 pandemic. So here, this line, necessity became the mother of invention. So during the pandemic, since we were all in lockdowns, we had to find different ways to cope with our situation. So necessity became a mother of invention. So our conditions, which were a necessity, led to many inventions. So here in this essay, we have different ideas of business that came through, and it is collected by different reporters. So each section is by a different reporter from all around the USA.
Okay, each section is by different reporters. Okay.
Can I scroll?
You can scroll this touch screen.
So as we can see, all of these are a wave of pandemic-driven innovation. So we can say that without the pandemic, these innovations might not have come through. And okay, so we went up. So these are innovations that have changed lives in America over the last year and a half. So these inventions have brought a change in the lives of people. So now moving on to the actual innovations that have been developed. So first of all, cocktails to go, and all of these.
The screen.
Okay, so all of these these essays are divided into 3 parts. That is background, what changed during the pandemic and why it will stick. So background is what happened before the pandemic, how the situation was before the pandemic. What changed during the pandemic is literally what changed during the pandemic, and why it will stick is what changes these innovations have brought and why it will be there even after the pandemic. So first of all, starting off with cocktails to go. So as we know, during the pandemic, most states enacted laws against selling alcohols for consumption off premises with the aim of reducing public drunkenness. So due to public drunkenness, the alcohol was not sold to go. And what changed during the pandemic is as lockdowns were imposed, struggling restaurants looked for ways to keep revenue flowing in. So as we all know, during the pandemic, we couldn't visit restaurants, so they were struggling. And they were finding a way in which they could keep the revenue flowing in. And alcohol, where's alcohol? So alcohol is a high margin item, meaning it can bring in high profit. And for many establishments and restaurants shift to takeout, which is focused on takeout, because for takeout we don't need to be in the restaurants. So they focus on takeout, as in they could take the alcohol with them. And they asked city and states to allow them to provide cocktails to go. That is the services of allowing public to take the alcohols back home. And now this is what's changed during the pandemic. So why it will stick after the pandemic is 16 plus states have made this to-go rule permanent. So this is why it will be sticking even after the pandemic.
So you said every section has 3 parts. Background, what was going on before the crisis arrived, and when the crisis was there, what things changed, and then why the change will continue.
Yes. Okay, now moving on to the next one, which is making cannabis essential. So cannabis is another word for marijuana. And now looking at the background. So this is before the pandemic. 18 states.
Background.
Yeah, background. So 18 states have legalized adult use marijuana and 16 states have legalized medical cannabis, but in these strange programs sit in a strange legal limbo. So obviously these are not very healthy things. So obviously the government cannot legalize it fully. So they have been in a legal limbo, as in they are not completely legal, but they are not completely illegal as well. So what changed during the pandemic is that the states allowed these cannabis businesses to stay open during lockdowns, and this also came with marijuana home delivery and curbside pickup. So curbside pickups means you can go to the store and pick up your delivery from the store. So that is the meaning of ordering from your phones. So this is the meaning of curbside pickup, is you order from your phone or the website and you go to the store and pick up your order. So this was all legalized, and many of those states are now moving to make this change permanent. And
explain the third one.
yeah, and this is after the pandemic. This was very advantageous for the medical marijuana patients, means those people who require marijuana for their health in a positive way, and many of whom suffer conditions that limit their mobility. So now, if we are wondering what medical conditions, there are people. It's apparently marijuana helps people with nerve diseases, cancer, and multiple sclerosis. So for these people, this innovation sticking after the pandemic turned out to be a boon or very advantageous. And now moving on to telehealth. So for telehealth, it is basically consulting the doctor, visiting a doctor or other medical professional over video or any other type of remote connection. And this has been there before, long been touted as a way to expand to healthcare. But before the pandemic, the adoption was low, and Medicare allowed telehealth access only for patients in rural areas. So this was there even long before the pandemic, but it was not as in use because people preferred to see doctors in person. So now what changed during the pandemic is telehealth used to permit access, permit patients to access healthcare from home to reduce the spread of the virus. So obviously because we could not go out, but we had to keep up with the doctors. So this permitted patients to access healthcare from home to reduce the spread of the virus. And now much of that new flexibility is still in place. So now why it will be sticking after the pandemic is telehealth usage. Telehealth usage has leveled off at a rate well above pre-pandemic levels, signaling that a significant number of patients prefer virtual healthcare in some circumstances. So after the pandemic, people were forced to use these services that had been in use, that had existed but they had not been used. So after using these services, some people even preferred virtual care in some circumstances. So that is what changed after the pandemic. So can I move on to the next one?
You can use the screen.
Okay, now next one is hotels to housing. So for the background, in America, so before the pandemic, the percentage of the homeless people were rising more than 30% since 2015. So the increase in tent encampments had already caused health scares in places like Los Angeles, and initial estimates indicated COVID-19 would cause thousands of homeless deaths in the street. So basically, the percentages of homeless people were rising, and it was obviously a threat during the pandemic because the pandemic spread through contact, and people living in the streets would obviously spread the disease, and this was a threat. And tent encampment here means a group of tents or temporary shelters put in one place. So they were basically provided a shelter to stay. So this was a major risk during the pandemic. And now what changed during the pandemic is State and federal policymakers worried about the spread of COVID were willing to spend money on moving homeless people into private hotel rooms. So the government, to control this spread of pandemic, they were thinking of moving the people from the streets to private hotel rooms. And now why this will be sticking is converting empty hotels to housing has been a game changer for cities and state grappling with rising homelessness. So it is obviously helping reduce the amount of homeless people. They are being provided with a home through hotels. And it will also, due to the pandemic, obviously the tourism has gone down a lot, and it will take years for hotels to return to pre-COVID occupancy rates because people are still scared to go outside and all that. And so, and this is also helping plenty of independent hotels that were struggling before the onset of the pandemic due to the rise of Airbnb. So many hotels were struggling even before the pandemic because there is a trend of Airbnb these days, so hotels are not having as much occupancy. So they were already struggling, and this is being a help to them because the government is paying these hotels to house these homeless people. So that is why it will be sticking even after the pandemic. So now moving on to mRNA vaccines. I'm having a little bit trouble understanding this one. So I summarized it. Can I just say the summarized version? So for mRNA vaccine, so I will tell you guys a summary of all of these. So the rapid development and success of mRNA vaccines against COVID-19 showcase the technology's potential, leading to continued applications or other diseases and treatments. So during the pandemic, we obviously had vaccines that were provided to people all over the world. So the technology which could make this vaccine in such a short amount of period showed that even for other diseases, there is possibilities of these vaccines being made as fast. So is that understandable? So now moving on to the next one, which is robot deliveries. Can we make it a bit smaller? Can you make it a bit smaller, maybe? There's sound ba noon minsan? So for robot deliveries, so the background for it is robotic companies have tried to popularize the use of mobile robots that travel on the sidewalks at the speed of a jogging pedestrian, primarily to deliver food from restaurants to residential customers. So this is basically saying that this service did exist even before the pandemic, however, failed to catch up due to small delivery market and wariness of robot interaction. So even though the service was present, there were not many customers who were willing to take it. So now, what changed during the pandemic? So during the pandemic, the market doubled during the pandemic. Obviously, again, it comes to low contact and so this again brings us to the aspect that the pandemic required low contact and attention. So the market doubled by during the pandemic. So the market for robot deliveries, it doubled during the pandemic, and the potential of a completely contactless transaction through robots drew the attention of small business owners. So these they basically saw a potential that their business could still run even despite this contactless transaction. And now,
why will it stick?
Now why this will be sticking? Okay, there's one more point before this. So now, what happened during the pandemic was Starship Technologies, one of the early pioneers of robots pre-pandemic, now deploys over 1,000 robots across the countries, which is nearly quadruple the number they started off with before the pandemic. So basically, their business boomed during the pandemic. Before the pandemic, their business quadruple, which is they were making 4 times more than what they were doing before the pandemic. So now why it will be sticking even after the pandemic is robot companies believe robots are the future of delivery services because they are far more efficient than cars, and so they are far more efficient than cars, and we can even reduce the amount of staffs. So that is why they will be sticking even after the pandemic. So now moving on to the next one, which is optional college exams. So institutions of higher learning have long required applications to submit standardized test scores, believing that the performance on SAT or ACT was a reliable indicator of first-year college success. So this is like us giving SEA exams on our 12 exams, which is SEE, to join this university. So the students in the USA are required to give exams like SAT or ACT to be able to join universities. So what changed during the pandemic is, again, we come back to the point that the pandemic required less contact. So the testing companies had to cancel the test in the spring of 2020 since it was suddenly dangerous for students to sit together in the testing sites to take exams. As a result, hundreds of colleges and universities across the country had previously required the exams, temporarily adopted a test optional admission policy. So before they did require this, it was mandatory, but for the pandemic, for that exception, they made an exception of test optional admission policy, means they could go through the admissions even without having given the test. So now, why this will stick is colleges and universities found that the test optional policies contributed to an increase in applicants from the students of color and first generation. So them canceling the test showed that there was an increase in the number of people applying for their college, and there were even an increase in the number of people of color and first generation. And now first generation students means like they are the first people from their family who are attending university. So this also suggested that these tests which were required to join the universities had actually been a barrier more than a qualifying thing. So this is why it will be sticking, because this is encouraging more people to pursue an education. So now we will be moving on to direct cash assistance. So what is direct cash assistance? So direct cash assistance is something that is supporting people in moments of scarcity and helping them solve immediate needs without jeopardizing their long-term financial health. So this is basically giving people money in times of scarcity without in the long term damaging their financial health. So this, I assume, is related to loans and stuff that is given by the government to the people. So now giving American benefits in the form of cash has been somewhat frowned upon, means there was some kind of stigma around it, that giving this kind of cash assistance. So before the pandemic, there was a stigma around it. Now something is going to change during the pandemic. So during the pandemic, the economy shut down in spring 2020, and the Congress of the USA moved to keep the economy afloat by doling out unprecedented levels of direct cash assistance to millions of Americans in the form of stimulus checks. So what is stimulus?
Check that stimulates economic activity.
So they
you get money, you spend, then economy moves ahead.
Yeah. So they gave out the cash during the pandemic because obviously many people were kicked out of their jobs, leading the change in economic activity and obviously scarcity for these people. And now why it will be sticking? So why it will stick is So if there is another crisis again, there are good chances that Congress will again turn to direct aid. So this stigma has been removed. So if there is another big crisis in USA, then people are again most likely to get cash assistance. And the economy has bounced back much more quicker than most expected. So even after the pandemic, due to direct cash assistance, the economy activity came in flow much quicker than they expected. So this is that means this is a good solution, and they'll be applying it in case there is another crisis. So now online education, which we are all very familiar with. So background information on this is, so online education has been around for decades, but it's long been stigmatized as inferior to in-person instruction. So this has existed even long before the pandemic, but people did prefer to learn in person, and this has been maybe looked as a method that is not as credible or not as effective. But what changed during the pandemic is thousands of colleges were forced to close classroom and shift to online-only instruction in just a matter of days or weeks. So before, we didn't really know of this in our country, but in US, it did exist. But during the pandemic, thousands of colleges, so we also experienced this, they had to shut down. So this somehow forced everyone to this form of education. And now, why it will be sticking after the pandemic is, so forced adoption of online learning has accelerated a trend of traditional university developing online degree programs normalized by hybrid models of teaching among even the most change-resistant part of higher education, potentially increasing access for students in remote areas or who face barriers to in-person education. So now this forced adoption has even changed traditional universities to provide an online degree, or hybrid models mean both online and in person according to the students or the teacher's need. And why this has been beneficial is it is increasing access for students in remote areas or those who face other barriers meaning they could be maybe differently abled or anything of that sort, something that prevents them from being in person. So now their education is not seen as uncredible or stigmatized. And now moving on to QR codes. This is again something we are all familiar with. So the QR codes, black and white squares of computer code that are increasingly ubiquitous have existed since the mid-1990s. So it has been around for a very, very long time. And the QR code stands for quick response, and they can transmit more data than barcodes, but were rarely used on consumer products prior to the pandemic. So it has been here for so long. It has been there since 1990, but we are just now seeing the booming use of QR codes. So it was rarely used on products prior to the pandemic. So what changed during the pandemic? So during the pandemic, restaurants and bars began opening their doors but still sought to socially distance to limit the spread of the virus. As a result, the QR code began appearing on dining tables as a way of patrons to summon up menus and often order straight from their phone. So basically during the pandemic, again, we are talking about no contact, no touch, and this was also the rules of the pandemic, but also what we needed to do to stay healthy. So restaurants and bars began opening, but to limit contact, they started using QR codes so that people could directly order from their table, or they could pay from their table, look at the menus from their table with as minimum contact as possible. So now why this will be sticking? So the convenience factor of QR codes seems likely to keep their use going in many restaurants, bar, and elsewhere, especially now people are used to the idea of pulling up codes on their phone. Businesses get to cut down on the amount of staff devoted to each customer, while some consumers may appreciate the freedom of order and the will of simplicity of making individual orders. So QR codes prove to be very convenient in restaurants and bars and elsewhere. Now you even see it in stores and everywhere. And now people are used to the idea of pulling up codes on their phone. And this will also help business to cut down on the amount of staff, means they can use that money maybe elsewhere. And consumers also may appreciate the freedom to order at will and the simplicity of making individual orders. So this might even help people who are very introverted or have social anxiety, and this limits conversation. So this has been proved to be very convenient. So now moving on to warp speed government investing. So here, warp speed means very high speed, extremely high speed. I'm having a little bit of trouble understanding this one.
Okay, explain the way you like.
So I can explain. So warp speed government investing. So warp speed means extremely high speed, and the government venture capital style investment approach exemplified by Operation Warp Speed for vaccine development demonstrated the potential for rapid innovation in critical areas. So
You can see the meaning here clearly. What is warp speed is, you know, look here. Money was put to speed up the activity, economic activity. That's go on. Explain. Speeding up the economic activity by putting more money. Go on.
Okay. So the Operation Warp Speed, it was a public-private partnership initiated by the U.S. government to facilitate and accelerate the development, manufacturing, and distribution of COVID-19 vaccines.
Accelerating the development, manufacturing, and distribution of vaccines. Go on.
Yes. So
What things changed? Let's try to say.
So what changed during the pandemic is government reached out to industry and said, we want to help provide an accelerated way of doing discovery and to bring to the commercial market. So I'm assuming the US government reached out to businesses and offered them the fundings and to provide an accelerated way, so to speed up whatever development they wanted.
Speeding up discovery and innovation.
And bringing it to the commercial market as soon as possible.
Yeah. Why will it stick? Try.
So why it will stick is getting a vaccine to the market can take upward of a decade, so this might speed up that process. And but Operation Warp Speed developed and commercialized COVID-19 vaccines in just about a year. So what could take a decade with Operation Warp Speed can be done in just about a year. So now this is bringing people to think, imagine if we did this for substance abuse, for suicide prevention. Oh, sorry, it starts from here. Imagine if we did this for high need areas for climate change. Imagine if we did this for substance abuse. So they are also saying that if the vaccines could be done, a process of a decade could be reduced to a year. So this could also be applied in other high need areas such as climate change and substance abuse, suicide prevention, etc.
We can apply the same in other areas. It will continue. Good. Go on.
So now, free school meals for everyone.
Food for everyone, okay.
Free school meals. Free school meals.
What is the heading?
Free school meals for everyone.
Okay.
So, background is the background summarized is the USA has a policy to provide some students who come under some guidelines, like they meet some kind of condition. They have this policy to provide them free food, but most of them don't go because it is a long process or some kind of hesitation. So most of the people, that policy is present. So it was there even before the pandemic. So as we can see here, K-12 students who meet federal household income guidelines, so maybe this is meaning that their household income is under a certain amount, have had long access to free and reduced meals at school, but many students who qualify don't actually sign up. Immigrant families may be fearful of government paperwork, and students who fear lunch shaming, so they might get bullied for having free lunch at school, don't take advantage of this program.
Lunch shaming, right? When you get free lunch, people make you feel ashamed.
Yeah. So basically, before the pandemic, this was there, but clearly it was not being taken advantage of the people who should have taken advantage of this because of their own problems. So now what changed during the pandemic is it wasn't So what changed during the pandemic is that it wasn't just learning that the students were missing. So obviously the schools had shut down. So it wasn't just learning that the students were missing, but many were going hungry because obviously their households are already under a certain income guideline. So, and the jobs being lost, so they might have been struggling with food. And the paperwork for this free lunch policy typically required to prove students qualify for free or reduced meals became more trouble than it was worth amid mass school closures. So having to go through this paperwork when the schools were closed, it became more trouble than it was worth. So the federal government also agreed to reimburse schools for free meals to all students regardless of income through this current school years to solve the problem. So the government just came to a decision that they will be providing free school meals to everyone regardless of their income status. So now why this will stick is that in some cases, a universal meal policy may not be that much of a cost increase at all, since schools sometimes have to absorb unpaid meal debts as a part of their operating costs. So all in all, this free school meal policy will not be much of a cost increase, because even if the students are not eating these meals that are being provided to them, this comes as a part of their operating costs. So they are having some kinds of costs with or without the students eating. So it is more advantageous for them to provide school meals to everyone. So this is why it will be sticking after the pandemic. So now, Netflix for jobs. So during the pandemic, unemployment rate have sunk closer to pre-pandemic levels. They don't capture the full employment pictures. In October, there were 2.3 million people who qualified as long-term unemployed, meaning they had been jobless for at least 27 weeks. Many of them let go during the pandemic. So as we know, as we have heard, during the pandemic, many people were not kicked out in a sense, but in a sense kicked out from their jobs because of various problems. And there were 2.3 million people who were qualified as long-term unemployed in the USA, which means they had been jobless for at least 27 weeks. And many of them, this situation arose because many of them were let go during the pandemic. So now, what changed during the pandemic? So what changed during the pandemic is this Netflix for job is A non-profit-led effort collaborated with Rhode Island state officials to use artificial intelligence and unemployment insurance data to match unemployed workers with training programs and new jobs based on their work experience, which industries are expanding in this state. So basically, this program is using artificial intelligence to match unemployed workers with training programs and new jobs based on their work experience. So they are basically going to collect their work experience and look at a job that matches their work experience and match it. Basically the same way that whatever we watch on Netflix, the same kind of genre gets recommended to us. So that's why the name Netflix for Jobs, because
So we have the word Netflix for job. Right?
Netflix for Job, because they are matching the jobs according to your experience. So that is why the term has come. So now, why it will stick after the pandemic is using AI to match workers to job opportunity has been proven an effective way to help workers re-enter the job market, something increasingly critical as existing worker shortage intensifies. So why this will be sticking is this has been proven advantageous to match workers to job opportunities that has and also help them to re-enter the labor market. So these are very essential things. So that is why popularized through the pandemic and will stick after the pandemic. So now moving on to street eateries. So street eateries is, before the pandemic, outdoor dining space tended to be a low priority both for city officials and restaurant owners, especially in the densely populated urban areas. So restaurants before the pandemic, they preferred to have like in dining, the outdoor dining experience was not much of a priority or not much preferred, I assume, in the USA. So that was the situation before the pandemic. So now after the pandemic, what changed during the pandemic is COVID spread easily indoors but not readily outdoors. Dining space became critical to reopening local establishments. Cities eased rules to allow restaurants to expand outdoor seating areas to nearby parking spots, sidewalks, and street. So COVID-19, it spread with very near contact. So it spread readily indoors, means restaurants in dining there was more risk, but in the outdoor space it was not that easily transferred. So the government allowed restaurants to expand outdoor seating areas to nearby parking spots, sidewalks, and streets for more of an outdoor dining experience. So now why this will be sticking is that the outdoor spaces provided a lifeline to many eating and drinking establishments during the pandemic, and restaurants are hoping that their streeteries will help them weather any new spikes in virus levels without being forced to shutter. So the restaurant owners, they also need to, this is their income source which shut down during the pandemic. So now this outdoor space for eating basically provided them way to keep their business running without being the cause for the increase in virus. So this is why it will be sticking after the pandemic. So now going on to voting by mail. So voting by mail has been around in the United States for decades, and while it has been a slow and steady increase in usage, until the pandemic, most Americans chose to vote in person on election day. So it was there before the pandemic, but not preferred. And now what changed during the pandemic is fearful of packing together in one location, such as a polling place, led to a rapid adoption of voting by mail. And some states expanded their voting systems on a temporary basis because of their virus. So now in 2020, a high record of 46% of Americans cast a mail ballot. So meaning 46% of the people chose to vote by mail according to this MIT, which is a rise from 21% in 2016. So when the voting was in 2016, there were just 21% of people who voted through mail, but in the pandemic, it increased to 46%. So now why it will stick is most...
Continue.
Keep going, keep going.
Okay. So now, why it will stick is but most male voters reported to be satisfied with the process, and election officials across the country expect at least some of the Korean method to stick. Some states that did not previously allow for all voters to choose cast a mail ballot under normal circumstances have now moved to make that change permanent. While 3 states, California, Vermont, and Nevada, have moved to universal vote by mail system after the pandemic. Now moving on to zooming. So now moving on to zooming. So video calls popularity shot up in the early 2010s with the iPhone 4's FaceTime capability, and the video conferencing had already started outspacing conferencing call in many workplaces prior to 2020. But even through Zoom video communications, Zoom didn't have a common verb in the style of Google until the pandemic, so meaning Zoom was not as popular until the pandemic. So now, what changed during the pandemic is work from home became a necessity in spring 2020 due to lockdown, as many workplaces turned to Zoom or other video conferencing system to facilitate meeting that once took place in person. And also a key form of communication for schools, for job interviews, and even for happy hours with now separated friend groups. And Zoom was especially popular during the pandemic, in part because it's designed to work in low bandwidth environments like home and cars. So this existed during the pandemic, and in the pandemic, many workplaces turned to Zoom or other video conferencing systems to facilitate meetings that once took place in person, so they had to switch to online. And it was a key form of communication even for schools and job interviews, and now happy hours with separated friend groups. And this was popular because it was designed to work in low bandwidth environment like homes and cars. सक्यो एउटा बाँकी छ So it was
explaining.
Zooming, so the Zoom service. And
yes, Zoom.
So now why it will be sticking is pandemic showed offices and employees that work from home is possible and now for some workers preferable. So Zoom basically showed the offices and employees that working from home is possible and now some people have even started to prefer it. So this is why it is sticking after the pandemic. So now for the last one, which is a silent restaurant service. So restaurant is sorry, this one is also a bit confusing. This one is also a bit
What is
confusing.
that? Explain that.
So in summary, I think this means that before the customer server the relationship, it was supposed to be very much like the people working for the restaurants and stuff. They had to show a very positive attitude, but with the COVID-19 coming, they had to reduce the number of staffs and they switched
No,
to.
read that background. Read the background. Read it loudly. Read that loudly.
Okay, traditionally, service with a smile was a trademark of the US restaurant industry, a sector that relies heavily on tips from happy customers to subsidize its labor force. So under US wage use law, employers can pay workers who earn more than $30 a week in tips as little as $2.13 an hour. So workers incentivized to interact cheerfully with customers.
When you talk a lot with a customer, the chances to contract virus grow. So this silent restaurant service means the waiters will be provided more tips by the restaurant maybe, and they won't have to talk a lot. And when they talk less and less, the chances to contract goes down. Right? Did you get? When the waiter and the customers talk, they might infect each other, right? But silent service, serve without talking. We have the mask and just smile but don't talk. Go on.
So that kind of interaction with customers became significantly riskier during the early days of the pandemic when public health experts were still learning about the virus. Lockdowns meant that the restaurants were working with less staff and relying largely on carry-out sales. Once the state started easing restriction, public health authorities instructed restaurants to use disposable or virtual menus and take other steps to limit contact.
If I do the same menu, I'll get infected.
That sending customers directly to a website or using QR codes to access menus.
Using QR code access menu on mobile phone.
Meant that they could operate with fewer staff. Some businesses have embraced what's become known as the silent service, where customers place and pay for their order on their phone with little interaction from service staff.
You talk through your phone, you don't interact, yes.
Yes. And now why it will be sticking is serving and bartending jobs are unlikely to disappear, but with restaurants still struggling to find workers, many will continue to operate with fewer staff. Another reason is that transitioning servers to roles and using QR codes and mobile ordering in-store provides an extra layer of protection for staff from dangers that come along with public-facing jobs, including exposure to COVID-19 and unruly or violent customers. So not only COVID, but also other risks such as violent customers, and they can also put the servers to other work, so that is why it will be sticking. So that is all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well done. Now wait a minute, before you unclip the mic, share some experience of how you prepared the presentation.
I printed this out and we had that assignment.
You printed,
Yeah.
and we had assignments.
So,
Then how was your experience of preparing this presentation?
yeah,
Any difficulty you faced?
I could not understand some of them, so I just made a summary of what I could not
Particularly about the
understand.
vaccine.
Vaccine and warp speed government, so those were difficult to understand. And
Give her again. Thank you.
okay.
Thank you. So we'll have a break now. And after break, we'll invite another presenter who will present banking connections. Thank you. Take a break.